If you're currently studying for your CompTIA Security Plus exam, then this is the right video for you because I passed my exam on my first attempt, and in this video, we're going to go over 10 practice questions from Domain 2 of the exam objectives, threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations. So let's get started. Question 1. Which of the following is most associated with installing third-party website applications? Blocked content, jailbreaking, side loading, or watering hole? And the correct answer is side loading because this is the concept of installing third-party website applications that are not native to the official App Store. Jailbreaking is the concept of modifying your mobile device's firmware so that you will have additional rights and privileges, and so that you can do things such as sideload, which is the concept of installing additional applications that are not from the native App Store. Blocked content is a broad term that you'll find in the exam objectives, and this describes content that is blocked, such as if you're using URL filtering. And the last one is watering hole, and this is an attack that attackers perform, and this means when the attacker identifies a website that employees, users, or individuals in general frequently visit, then they find a vulnerability in that website, exploit the website, and then do things such as redirect those users to their own malicious website. Question 2. A user received a suspicious text message containing a link to an external website. Which of the following is being described? Shadow IT, vishing, insider threat, or smishing? And the correct answer is smishing because this refers to SMS phishing. It's phishing over text. And whenever you see that they're receiving a text message, you know immediately that at least one of the potential answers, if you had to select several, is going to be smishing. So phishing in general is the concept of divulging sensitive user information through extracting that. So you get your users to divulge their personal information without them knowing that you're actually a malicious individual. And the difference between phishing and smishing is that smishing does it over text as opposed to email. Insider threat is a disgruntled employee in the organization who has malicious intentions and who would do some things such as take a USB thumb drive or a hard drive, plug it into the organization's devices, exfiltrate terabytes of data, and then simply walk out of the organization with that data, or even worse, leak all that data online and potentially get paid for doing so. Vishing is voice phishing. It's extracting user information, but over a phone call. And finally, shadow IT. This is the concept of users in the organization who misuse software or hardware and who enable vulnerabilities to occur. But these employees who perform shadow IT, they don't have malicious intentions. They could just be doing it, for example, because their computer is slow, so they want to disable the antivirus software or disable the firewall or install a random wireless access point that is not using WPA3, but is instead using something like WEP. They just don't have malicious intentions, but they're just doing this for ease of use. They're changing the software or the hardware in the organization without that change being approved by the IT department. Question 3. Which of the following is most important to secure in the event of an insider threat? Removable device, vulnerable software, unsecure wireless network, or unsupported systems and applications? And the correct answer is removable device because a removable device is something like a USB drive or a hard drive that you can insert into a device and remove it at will. Because as we discussed, an insider threat can easily plug in one of these devices and simply walk out of the organization with all their data. Vulnerable software is a brief term that describes any kind of software that is vulnerable to exploits. So this can be things like bloatware, which is unused software on a device. Unsecure wireless network. This is also a broad term that refers to a wireless network that is not using WPA3, but is instead using something like WEP, which is vulnerable to a multitude of exploits. Finally, unsupported systems and applications describes any kind of system or application that is not receiving updates anymore. This is associated with the concept of end of life, whereby the device no longer receives updates or patches from the software manufacturer. Question 4. A hacktivist ran a network scan against an organization's systems and discovered that SMB and Telnet are running. Which of the following has been discovered? Default credentials, open service ports, vulnerable software, or SQL injection vulnerability? And the correct answer is open service ports, because SMB, Telnet, FTP, SSH, these are all considered ports, which are just live services that run on a device and they perform a specific dedicated function. Default credentials refers to any credentials, such as a username or a password, that have not been changed since the user purchased a piece of hardware, such as a router that uses default passwords and usernames. So, by far, the most common username and password combination that you'll find is admin as the username and admin as the password as well. Vulnerable software, just a brief term to describe software that is vulnerable to exploits and needs to be patched. And finally, SQL injection vulnerability. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and this involves exploiting a database vulnerability that would allow you to modify, view, or edit database information. But we're looking for open service ports because SMB, which is server message block, and Telnet, which provides no encryption, are considered open service ports. Question 5. Which of the following would most likely result from an on-path attack? End of life, replay, default password changes, or privilege escalation? And the correct answer is replay, because in the exam objectives, replay refers to what is known as a replay attack, which is the concept of an attacker eavesdropping or intercepting the connection between a user and a remote server, and then doing something like stealing the session ID that the user is using, and then replaying or resending that session ID to the server, mimicking the user, and so the server thinks that the attacker is indeed the legitimate user. An on-path attack is a man-in-the-middle attack and involves intercepting a network connection. End of life refers to the concept of a hardware device that is no longer receiving updates or patches from the official hardware manufacturer. Default password changes is a very good thing to do in general because you don't want to have those default credentials set. And finally, privilege escalation is a vulnerability which, if exploited, would result in an attacker having elevated privileges on a system. So, for example, if an attacker exploited a privilege escalation vulnerability in Windows, they could achieve administrator level access. Or if they exploited this privilege escalation vulnerability in Linux, they could achieve a root level access. Question 6. An organization purchased a proprietary router that came with pre-installed default credentials. Shortly after, the organization was affected by a malware outbreak. Which of the following was most likely the cause? Worm, keylogger, insider threat, or side loading? And the correct answer is a worm, because this is a self-replicating piece of malware that exploits things such as default credentials being used. So a worm, depending on the worm type, might search the internet for things like default credentials used on various network devices, and if it locates a device using these default credentials, it can exploit that device and spread to the other devices in the organization. And the most popular example of a worm is the WannaCry ransomware worm that exploits SMB v1, which runs on port 445. A keylogger is also a very sophisticated piece of malware, but it could also be a hardware device. And what this does is that it tracks all the keys that you type on your keyboard, including things like the spacebar or the backspace or Control V or Control C, for example. It shows this all directly on the attacker's screen because they have installed this keylogging software on your device. Insider threat is a malicious actor in the organization who has malicious and nefarious intentions and who would do something such as exfiltrate company data. Finally, sideloading is the concept of installing third-party applications that are not from the native app store. Question 7. An organization is using a mobile device manager to ensure the security of mobile devices. Which of the following is most associated with this process? Segmentation, isolation, jailbreaking, or application allow list? And the correct answer is an application allow list because a mobile device manager is a piece of software such as Microsoft Intune. That is the most popular example of an MDM that allows you to manage all the mobile devices in the organization. And one of the things that the mobile device manager can do is to provide you with an application allow list so that only certain applications could be installed on the mobile devices of that organization. Another thing that mobile device managers can do, and this is important for your exam as well, is that they can do something called remote wipe, which is the concept of if your mobile devices get stolen or lost, using an MDM, you can perform a remote wipe, which is to wipe out all the data on that device so that an attacker wouldn't be able to view that information. Jailbreaking is the concept of modifying your mobile device's firmware so that you can have additional rights and access and you can perform side loading. Isolation is the concept that describes isolating infected devices on the network. This is a synonym for quarantining your infected devices. And finally, segmentation is the concept of logically segmenting or dividing your network using things like VLANs or virtual local area networks into individual segments, improving the security of your organization. But the difference between segmentation and isolation is that in isolation, this refers to when you have to isolate infected devices, whereas segmentation is something you do well before you ever got infected. Question 8. Which of the following threat actors would most likely launch a DDoS attack against a celebrity's website? Nation state, organized crime, insider threat, or unskilled attacker? And the correct answer is an unskilled attacker because this refers to an individual who doesn't really know what they're doing, but they're motivated by their peers, by impressing their peers. That's their main motivation. And they just try and test tools against random websites, such as a celebrity website, for no reason. And a DDoS attack is a distributed denial of service attack. This involves using either several people or several devices to attack a single website to an attempt to take it down. Insider threat refers to a malicious employee in the organization who has bad intentions. Organized crime refers to a threat group that is very sophisticated, that is motivated by financial gain, profit, ransomware, anything involving money. And finally, nation state is the most sophisticated threat group in the Security Plus exam objectives, and these are also known as state-sponsored government actors, and did do things like attack the critical infrastructure in other countries. But that's way too sophisticated for what we're looking here of launching a DDoS attack. That's going to be an unskilled attacker. Question 9. An organized crime threat group is using ransomware as a service against famous companies for financial gain. Which of the following is most associated with this process? And choose two. Data exfiltration, blackmail, disruption/chaos, revenge, or war? And the correct answers are data exfiltration and blackmail, because these are all objectives that are listed in the exam objectives that describe motivations for various attackers. So, for example, we have organized crime groups that are motivated by financial gain, of course, and one of their motivations is also data exfiltration because if you're using ransomware, especially ransomware as a service, which is the concept of first downloading all the company data and then encrypting it so that there's really no way that that organization can get out of this, then they're exfiltrating that company's data. Blackmail is the concept of saying, if you don't do this, such as if you don't pay us, we're going to leak all your information online. So for example, and this actually is very ironic considering this is Udemy, but the Shiny Hunters hacking group they performed a blackmail against Udemy saying that we're going to leak all the data that we hacked if you don't pay us a large sum of money. Disruption/chaos is the motivation of unskilled attackers. They just want to see the world burn. Revenge and war So revenge is associated with insider threats because typically that insider threat has been fired, he's disgruntled, or he's going to be fired, so he wants to gain that revenge on that company for firing him. Finally, war is the motivation that's associated with nation state threat actors because they do things like war and they attack countries that they don't like. And question 10, which of the following would most likely be used to exploit an air-gapped system? Open service ports, removable device, voice call, or brute force? And the correct answer is a removable device because an air-gapped system is a system that is completely physically disconnected from the internet, and there's no way for any internet-connected devices to reach that system. The only way that you could actually infect or exploit the system is using a removable device, such as an infected USB drive that you'd plug into that air-gapped system, and then that would allow you to infect it. Open service ports refers to services that are running on that device. So FTP on port 21, SSH on port 22, Telnet on port 23, SMTP on port 25, and so on. Voice call refers to vishing, which is calling someone over the phone and then getting them to divulge their personal or sensitive information. And finally, brute force refers to a brute force password attack, which is an attack that attempts endless passwords against a single user account until you can successfully log in, hopefully. So, those were the 10 questions of Domain 2 of the exam objectives. And if you were genuinely serious about passing your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did, then click the first link in the description and join my Telegram group because there I post tips and tricks on exactly how to pass your Security Plus exam that you're not going to find anywhere else on the internet. So I share my exam experience. I tell you exactly what I did right, what I did wrong, what I know I should do for all my other CompTIA exams, what made me fail some of my other CompTIA exams actually, and what made me pass the Security Plus exam on my first attempt so that you can do just that. So click the first link, join the group, and I'll see you there.